introduce Carrie Batchelder, who is from CDHS. She's the two-generation manager of the Office of Early Childhood. And she is going to start off with just an overview of the two-generation coaches.
So, good afternoon. Thanks so much for being here. I know it's summertime and there's lots going on, so we really appreciate your commitment to coming. And we've been planning this for quite a while now, so I think we're excited to finally be here and be providing this workshop for you. So I want to just sort of introduce myself in my role first. So as Heather mentioned, my name is Carrie Batchelder. I'm the two-generation manager for the Department of Human Services. And I always kind of say that the manager title is a little bit of a misnomer. I'm not actually managing any particular program, but really I like to think of myself more as a coordinator, and a coordinator between our more child-focused programs and our adult-focused programs. So my position really sits across the whole department, sort of an umbrella position where I get to work with all our different programmatic areas, and really, again, ensure that our child-focused programs are connecting to our adult-focused programs, that they're forming partnerships and aligning systems, and just really an effort to really integrate our child and adult serving program areas. And so I serve as a resource to do that, a connection to other resources, just a facilitator of those conversations and partnerships. So that's my role at the Department of Human Services. So I want to start really with, well first actually, let me just show of hands, how many of you are sort of familiar with the two-generation language, concepts, those kinds of things? Okay, so a good portion, great. I should mention and give kind of a shout out to Ascend at the Aspen Institute, because they are the ones that are primarily responsible for a lot of the visuals and thinking and information that I'll be presenting to you today. They are, if you haven't heard of them, they are a policy program that's centered on two-generation approaches, some kind of a national hub for breakthrough ideas and collaborations related to this approach, and they're in Washington, D.C., out of D.C., so just a shout out to them. But I wanted to start with, really why a two-generation approach, and probably even more particular, kind of why a two-generation approach for our department. And that really for us comes down to the fact that the U.S. of the 21st century looks really different from the U.S. of the 20th century, right? The demographics are changing. We are, going to be a majority-minority nation in the next 30 years. The economy is shifting, particularly in the number of women, especially mothers who are in the workforce. Family structure is changing, right? We have more single parents, again, particularly women, than ever before. And then also, this a changing landscape of technology that we're living in as well. So, all of those things, I think, really, set the context for this newer approach. And one thing actually that was an example that was just given to me recently was the child support system, and how that child support system was really built when intact families became intact, in the structure and the context of, having intact families who then became intact, who became not intact. And so, not in this world of parents and families that are never sort of intact families, that never married, or, those kinds of things. So, and we're trying to kind of now retrofit this child support system that was created in this one context to this newer context, and it's not necessarily doing so very successfully. So, most of our social programs, that one included, have really been built on the definition of what the country looked like decades ago, demographically, economically, in terms of two-parent married families, limited technology, all of those things. And so when you take a closer look at some of these shifts in the national context, and then you add to that the sort of growing skills and education that the economy now demands, it really underscores the fact that it's imperative to change the ways in which we're helping families succeed. So if we really want to move families beyond poverty, and not just sort of an acute rise from poverty and then, they kind of cycle back in to poverty, but really sustain them beyond poverty across generations in this new sort of 21st century context, then we have to change the way that we do business. And so the two-generation framework, it really gives us that new lens, or newer lens, I should say, because as I'll share in a little bit, it's not, entirely new, through which to better serve families in this new 21st century context. So whereas previously we conducted a lot of individual assessments, we're very client-focused, whether the identified client was the child or the adult, we gave that identified client services and supports. The two-generation lens really means assessing the whole family, right? Both the child and the parent at the same time, and providing services and supports simultaneously. So for instance, while dad is, getting an education at the local voc tech school, or while mom is working, the provision of childcare becomes an early learning opportunity, not just a work support strategy so that mom can continue to work or dad can continue to go to school. Providing that sort of simultaneous high-quality childcare services is really an investment in that child to position them to stay beyond poverty across generations as well. So what we know about returns on investment, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with, is that high-quality early education can produce a return as high as 7 to 10%, and that parents' educational attainment is the best predictor of economic mobility. So really anything that we can do to support both of these things simultaneously really maximizes their impact. Another example, parent participants in a post-secondary education program, they have shared that they are more involved with their children's learning as a result of their participation in their own education, right? And so that mutual sort of motivation suggests that the benefits of a two-generation program is really about sort of the sum of their individual parts, not about the individual services and supports, but really that sum of those services and supports. And what I really appreciate about the two-generation lens is also that it recognizes that moving beyond poverty is really a journey. That it's not simply, you get a job and now you're no longer in poverty, right? I mean, for a lot of people, it's about getting a job, getting maybe another job, having some economic supports for a period of time until their circumstances really begin to improve. And that there's also not one sort of cure-all component. It's not just early child care, it's not just economic supports, it's not just education and employment, but it's all of those things within sort of this larger strategy that really moves individuals and families beyond poverty. So the need that we're really addressing with the two-generation framework is that either the child or the parent is oftentimes left behind, and the family's chance of success really reduced when fragmented policies and programs are utilized to address the needs of children and parents separately. Placing parents and children in silos really ignores the daily challenges that are faced by parents who are working or studying while raising a child. And this is a challenge that's even more pronounced for those who are working for lower wages. So the solution being policies and programs that address the needs of children and their parents together, which better harnesses the family's full potential and really puts the entire family on a path to more permanent economic security. Providing opportunities for children and their parents together is really a more efficient approach and creates a greater potential return on investment, again, by maximizing that impact, as I said earlier, in families, and really streamlines the system that is serving them. So that solution really leads us into sort of the working definition of a two-generation approach, which is that two-generation approaches provide opportunities for and meet the needs of children and their parents together. And what you'll probably notice as well is that the parent-child relationship is really at the core of two-generation approaches. And I love this visual in particular because I think it's really helpful to programs in terms of thinking about sort of where they are at on the continuum. So obviously you have your solely child-focused programs, your solely parent-focused programs, but then you have child-parent approaches which focus first or primarily on the child, but are sort of moving toward a two-generation approach and also include some services and opportunities for the parents. And then similarly, you have a parent-child approach, which focuses first or primarily on the parents, but again is moving toward a two-generation approach and also includes some services and opportunities for children. And then you have sort of smack dab in the middle there, whole family approaches, which really focus equally and intentionally on services and opportunities for the parent and the child. And I kind of like to think about this in sort of three kind of tiers. The first being assessment of the family as a unit, right? I mean, you have to do that first to really be able to provide simultaneous services and supports. That being said, I mean, in human services, sometimes that does happen by sort of happenstance, that you're providing services to both the child and the parent. But really, if you're taking a two-generation approach and you're being intentional about it, then the first step there really is to assess the family as a unit, as a whole. And then that second tier then is to provide simultaneous services and supports resulting from that assessment. And then the third sort of gold standard tier is really about intentionally pursuing better outcomes for both parents and their children. So where you are really holding yourself accountable for outcomes for both the child and the parent. That's how you get sort of smack dab in the middle of the continuum. And so, you know, if you are an employment program and you're providing some services for the children, but you're really only holding yourself accountable to that employment outcome, to, you know, parent-focused type outcomes, then you're not smack dab in the middle of the continuum. And similarly, if you're an early childhood program and you're providing some referrals for parents to other services, again, that's certainly on the continuum, but if you're not holding yourselves accountable to those parent outcomes, and really your focus is still on child outcomes, then again, you're not right in the middle there. And I don't say that to say that at the Department of Human Services, we know how that looks like, you know, exactly and perfectly across all of our programs. Certainly all of our programs are also at different points along this continuum. But again, part of my job is to really help them to think about how they can get closer to the middle. So one of the things we wanted to do is you have on your tables, or you should have little sort of individual pieces of paper that have this continuum on it. What we'd like to do to kind of just facilitate a little bit of introduction and then some information gathering is to kind of have you all introduce yourselves to each other if you don't know each other already at your table. And then take a moment on the continuum to think about the program that you work with. If you don't work with a specific program, you could use, you know, think of a program that you're familiar with that you would want to use as your example. And just write that program on the top there so we know what program you're referring to, and just think a little bit about where you might fall on that continuum. Make a mark where you might fall, write some notes on it about, you know, again, why you think you fall at that part of the continuum, and just take a few moments to really think about that. So again, introduce yourselves first, take a moment to think about that for your program, write it on there. Certainly if you're struggling with where you're at on the continuum, ask your colleagues for help, and we'll take probably about 10 minutes for you to just do that. Any kind of aha moments from the discussion? Okay, well, for the people that kind of came in during the small group discussion there, feel free to also, at some point in time, go ahead and take one of those little sheets of paper. Again, what people were doing was sort of putting themselves or their program, the policy they work on, whatever makes sense for you, kind of on the continuum. Make sure you put what program or policy you're referring to on that. And then if you guys don't mind just leaving those on the table, we'll pick those up afterwards.
Can I actually jump in?
Yeah, sure.
So I'm with the Civic Canopy. We're the facilitating backbone organization for the Early Childhood Colorado Partnership, which is the statewide network supporting progress and possibilities today. And I was thinking about it from the lens of the network, the partnership network. And the ideal is that the network would be right in the middle, that whole family focus. It's a cross-sector network, broad network of 450 people now, almost 500 people across the state are on our listserv. And the ideal would be that we're whole family focused, but the reality, as I think about it, is that a lot more people on the network are on the child focused side than it should be. And so part of what I was hoping to kind of gather from today, and what I'm thinking about as kind of the coordinator and supporter for this network, is how the network can think about bringing in more parent-focused partners, and what partners are those, and who are we missing at this table. So that's kind of what's running through my head right now.
How many of you work specifically in child-focused programs, early childhood, or the policy areas, or just whatever work you do is pretty, early childhood, child-focused? How many people come from sort of the other realm of like more adult focus, maybe economic security or employment, so, you know, adult education, those kinds of pieces. Anybody from that world? Okay, great. So as I mentioned earlier, I kind of wanted to provide sort of a brief history of the two-generation approach. Again, as I alluded to earlier, the idea that the needs of vulnerable parents and children can be tackled together is not necessarily a new idea. The concept was really explicitly introduced with the launch of Head Start in 1965, and then the Foundation for Child Development actually coined the term two-generation program in the early 1990s. And so initially, innovation in this area really involved two different strategies, and one of those was embedding economic security programs for parents into early childhood education programs, and then also adding childcare to education and employment services for parents. So in that first strategy, the economic security services that were linked to early childhood programs included things like adult basic education, GED attainment, strategies to obtain entry-level jobs, and to leave welfare. And in general, the adult programs in these more child-oriented settings weren't particularly intensive, they weren't very widely implemented, or extensively studied. Instead, most services for parents in early childhood education programs in the 80s and the 90s emphasized family support, parenting, literacy, mental health, access to public benefits, but all of these things were really seen as more closely aligned with early childhood programs' primary mission of achieving positive development for children. So again, sort of the intentional outcome there was still really focused around child development outcomes, even though they were providing some of these other more parent-focused services. And then in the second strategy that started with parents, it was primarily adolescent mothers on welfare. That was really the target group with this kind of approach or this strategy. Their chief goal was to really promote life skills, high school graduation or GED attainment, employment, and really reductions in long-term welfare dependency. But again, the elements of these programs that really directly targeted children were undeveloped, they were underused, and they often involved childcare of unknown quality, which I think you'll see that sort of in this new wave of programs, we really have a new sort of renewed recognition of the importance of quality early childhood care. So the issues really with these initial set of strategies was first that these large-scale demonstration programs for adolescent mothers, the results from those were pretty disappointing. There was some short-term benefits, but not really any sort of long-term results. In that time period, late 80s, early 90s, work-first policies really had come to dominate the conversation. Welfare reform was underway. The 1996 Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act mandated that recipients work, gave fewer education and training options, they set time limits, and sanctions for not following the rules. Federally funded job training programs for low-income adults shrank significantly. The 1998 Workforce Investment Act primarily supported job search and placement programs rather than training and education. And then there's the context that I spoke of a little bit earlier, with this sort of advancing technology and globalization, that many jobs in the US started to require increasingly higher levels of education and training than in the past. And sort of low-skilled jobs that paid enough to support a family started to largely disappear. So that kind of brings us to, again, this sort of second wave of programs that you might kind of call Generation 2.0. Which really has a renewed and explicit focus on low-income parents and children in the same program. So it really considers the full range of low-income families, not just those who are on welfare, and not just adolescent mothers on welfare. And as programs unfold, the people who are designing these programs are really giving considerable thought to which subgroups are most likely to succeed, how they should be targeted, how they should be approached. So more of this sort of individualized, type of program design than sort of a cookie-cutter, one-size-fits-all kind of approach. It really recognizes, as I mentioned earlier, the compelling evidence that high-quality early childhood education centers can have significant short and long-term benefits for children. And so those centers have really become an essential building block for new two-generation programs. The kind of new wave of programming is capitalizing on new directions in job training that really go beyond just search and placement, but really include education and training and sectoral career pathways, so healthcare, IT, manufacturing, those kinds of career pathways models as well. And then it really combines programs for adults and children that have previously been kept in separate silos. That's, again, sort of the way that this new set of programs is kind of moving. So these are what are considered the components of the core components of a two-generation approach. And again, this is another great visual from Ascend at the Aspen Institute. I think that as this has developed, they probably, or evolved, they would probably now say that they would make all of these cogs of similar size. The research still shows that programs and policies are most successful when families have access to three things, and that's quality education, economic supports, and social capital. And so I think that's in part why those cogs were somewhat bigger on this initial visual. But that being said, certainly over just the few years that I've been doing this work and that they've been in existence, I think that they've come to understand the importance of health and well-being and what a large piece that is, and also probably that social capital is something that really permeates all of the other pieces. So I don't know that it's a separate cog. It's really something that you find in all of those other areas. But just to talk about some of these buckets a little more specifically around quality education. So that we're talking about post-secondary education for adults, workforce development, early childhood education. Again, as I mentioned earlier, parents' level of educational attainment is a strong predictor of children's educational and economic outcomes in the United States. So in that bucket, we're looking to do things like increase literacy skills for both children and parents, provide student parents early childhood and other supports, link early childhood development programs and higher education, utilize schools as hubs for delivering child and family services. There's this kind of new movement going on called the community school, in which human services type programs are embedded in a public school system. In the economic supports bucket, we're talking about housing, transportation, financial education and asset building, tax credits, child care subsidies, student financial aid, Pell Grants, health insurance, Medicaid, food assistance, SNAP, all of those things. An increased family income during early childhood can have a profound and long-lasting impact on children's lives. And a growing proportion of young children are living in families that are stressed by food insecurity or household budgets that are disproportionately going to the cost of housing. So here we're talking about building financial education and family assets. We're talking about protecting family economic gains through continuity and bundling of supports. So protecting promotions and wage gains through mitigating the cliff effect and providing longer transition periods for families that experience a gain in wages or promotion. Building education and social capital throughout housing transitions. That's all part of that economic supports bucket. And then lastly, the social capital piece. Social capital really being the network of people and institutions upon which a family can rely. That's a critical contributor to the well-being of children and their parents, just as it's been a critical contributor to all of us, right? And so we're talking about peer support, family, friends, and neighbors, community and faith-based organizations, school and workplace contacts, leadership and empowerment programs, case managers, career coaches, cohort models, learning communities, all of those things. And so again, aimed at developing strong parent-child relationships early on, building family life skills, and supporting parent engagement in early childhood through those social networks. The evidence shows, which is probably not a surprise to you all, but that mothers who've used childcare benefit from the advice of other mothers that they encounter. And as a result, they're actually able to navigate hardships more effectively and more efficiently access resources such as economic supports. Because again, that social network builds their kind of family life skills. So approaches, overall that serve children and their families together, they recognize that every member of the family has a role in achieving economic security, and if we design programs and policies with the whole family's educational and economic future in mind, and help them access the social networks that they need to really make it in life, then opportunity becomes more of a family tradition. So I'm going to skip through this slide really quickly just for time purposes, but this kind of just gives you a sense of sort of what the old thinking was and what were sort of the new thinking. My contact information is in here and then also on the handout that you have, so if you want a copy of the slides at all, please feel free to contact me and I can provide those to you.
And we'll make sure to email the set of slides to everybody afterwards too.
So the other thing that we did sort of for time purposes, a lot of times I talk about sort of what we are doing at the state in those different sort of buckets. Again, for time purposes, we decided to kind of put that all in a handout for you. So you should have picked up one of these when you came in. And so this just gives you kind of an overview, again, of kind of what we've been doing as the Department of Human Services in this area. It shows you at the top what our kind of priority areas have been, and they've really been focused around employment, particularly for non-custodial parents, also focused on economic supports and wealth building, and then also focused on early childhood education. So in the employment section, you'll see, again, some examples of some programs, a couple of which are really specified to non-custodial parents. You'll see also some information about a new pilot program that we're hoping to launch in November, a Children's Savings Account pilot program that's also been a priority. And then I'm sure many of you are familiar with sort of the work in early childhood in our office, Colorado Shines, the PDIS, and the legislation from last session on CCAP as well. And then kind of covering all these areas was the launch of the Universal Application, which added some early childhood programs like early intervention and CCAP to the existing PEAK system, which has all of your economic benefit type programs on it as well. And so then on the back of that is, I said at the Aspen Institute, they put out a document not too long ago called the Top 10 for 2Gen. And this was really their list of the top 10 policies to promote two-generation strategies. So that just gives you a sense of sort of where the field is going. The ones that I bolded, I think, are the ones that we as an administration at the Department of Human Services will really be trying to push forth in the next few years. So again, the front side kind of shows you what we have been doing and what our priorities are, and the back side shows you kind of where we're going. So really trying to better integrate our economic security into home visiting programs, looking at our TANF program, Colorado Works, and how we redesign that for the 21st century, and then really how we integrate the behavioral health system into the economic security system, into the early childhood system, into children, youth, and families as well, how we better utilize that system as well.
Carrie, is this on the website that it could be easily shared?
So it is not. We don't have a two-generation page on the website yet. I'm working on that. But I can, Hannah has it.
And we, there's a Padlet page for the meeting today.
Yeah.
Well, so when we do the follow-up email with everybody, I'll make sure to include the PowerPoint in our Padlet page where we usually just put all the resources, and I'll make sure everybody has that.
All right, because this top 10, I know of a couple of groups that need this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's actually also, the full document is actually on the Ascend website. So their website is in the PowerPoint as well, so you can get the full document on their website. So, Hannah, you're going to have to help me here. One thing I did want to do, however, is just give a little, example. You know, today's gathering workshop is really focused on knowledge building and providing you all with a lot of knowledge. And the part 2 is really about how you apply that knowledge. But we kind of wanted to tease it a little bit with sort of an example of a two-generation program. And this is our Colorado Parent Employment Program. And this is referenced on your handout. But this is a program that's focused on non-custodial parents. And it's basically, it's in 5 counties right now: Jefferson, El Paso, Arapahoe, Boulder, and Powers County. And if you are a non-custodial parent who has a current child support order but you're unable to pay because you're underemployed or unemployed, but you're willing to pay, you're willing to work, you want to have a relationship with your child, then you go into one of these county child support agencies and you are eligible for the program. You are then randomly assigned to receive either traditional services as usual or an enhanced set of services because we're part of a larger federal demonstration project, so it has this very rigorous evaluation with it. But that's a 5-year project. And if you're assigned to the enhanced services group, then you receive intensive case management. You receive some enhanced child support services, so you might get arrears forgiveness, a modification of order, you might get your license reinstated. You would also receive a 16-hour nurturing parent curriculum that also involves a peer support model with it, and then also intensive employment services. And so last summer we commissioned a documentary that was done on the program. The full documentary is about 20-25 minutes. It's pretty powerful, but hopefully this clip will just kind of show you the power of the peer support model and that social capital. And really, why we think of this as a 2-generation program is because, we're not only focused on the employment outcomes for adults, but really changing the outcomes for the child through the improved relationship with that non-custodial parent and the improved relationship with the entire family, including the custodial parent. That's not as evident in this particular clip, but in the actual full documentary, you see a couple of the ex-wives and custodial parents are interviewed as well, and so you really get that sense as well. So, just a quick clip for you. That was commissioned last year to examine public support for 2-generation approaches versus programs that are targeted to just parents or to just children. And so this was done last September. It was a national survey of about 1,000 adults over the age of 18 nationwide in the continental United States. And as might not be surprising to you, Americans overwhelmingly believe that a 2-generation approach is most effective when compared to, again, approaches that are just aimed at children or just aimed at parents. And then, again, I'll let you kind of read that on your own, sort of the other specific responses to some of the individual questions that were on the survey. And then again, when it goes out, I'll look at that more closely as well. But kind of just wanted to leave you there with that information. My contact information is also on the next slide, so again, you'll have that as well. It's also on the handout. And then if you want more resources on the 2-Gen approach, Ascend and the Aspen Institute is a great website. Again, that top 10 for 2-Gen document, the full document, can be found at that Ascend and the Aspen Institute website as well. And I'm from here for now.
So that's a great overview. Everybody believes something. This is my program. I hope so, because I was actually looking at the cause, and it's like, oh, we don't do anything with economic supports, but everything else we have there. And so how do we fill that gap? And so I hope everybody is starting to think that when you think about what's missing or what you can do better. So next we have Kendra Dunn, who has a very long title. She's the Child Maltreatment Prevention Director at the Office of Early Childhood and co-lead for the Strengthening Families Coalition. And she is going to provide an overview of the Strengthening Families.
I don't know who did the likes for the video, but
Oh, yes.
that'd be awesome.
That's my fan.
So I see a lot of familiar faces in the room, so I'm going to ask you guys first to just raise your hand if you already do Strengthening Families work or know about Strengthening Families Network. Okay, so that's kind of what I thought. So I'm going to start with an activity. Today we've been sitting for a little while. And then I'm going to do a quick overview. And just to explain, we are videotaping this, so it can be used in the future. So I am going to still do a high-level 20,000-foot overview, but I'm going to rely on you guys a lot more to type up and give examples and have a discussion with me as we go through this, okay? All right, so if you guys would all stand up, and I'm going to ask you to go find someone you don't know as well. And I'm going to give you 4 minutes to talk about this question, okay? Yeah, Abby's got to find someone. There's some people up here. That's the problem. If I know you, then I can call you out. Okay, so here's the question that you guys are going to answer. Remembering back to your childhood or youth, what is the most important lesson that you learned about being a good parent? Make sure you both get an answer.
Say it one more time.
Okay, thinking back to your childhood or youth, what is the most important lesson that you learned about being a good parent? experience like? Someone want to give me feedback? Did any of you experience any discomfort at first about talking about things that maybe felt kind of personal?
I think the second question was a little more personal than the first question, so that one felt a little more like, oh, okay, I have to think about this answer for a minute.
It was harder to get started.
Yeah, yeah.
I was just struck by kind of where we got on our struggle around asking for help on that second question, and how culturally, you know, and then how that's reflected in our services.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then it just trickles down.
This is a snippet of an exercise that, that I use when I'm training, whether it's providers or families. Because I think one of the things about the Strengthening Families framework that it's so important is that it's really about all of us. In 2001, the Center for the Study of Social Policy in DC was given a really large grant, a gift, truthfully, from the Doris Duke Foundation, with the charge to go out and find a new way to prevent child abuse and neglect. And I happened to live in DC at the time and got to participate in some of those early big stakeholder meetings. I by no means get to claim any responsibility for the framework. But I remember how overwhelming those meetings were, because you don't know what you don't know. You don't know that so it's that idea of like, what we're doing isn't enough, it isn't working, we're not moving the needle. You know, we've raised awareness, but we haven't reduced child abuse. What do we do? How do we do something new? And at the time, we were still really focused only looking at risk factors, right? How do we predict who's gonna need help and what kind of help do we need to give them? And so truthfully, this seemed like a really big charge. So the first thing that happened was kind of hammering out of some criteria. What do we need a framework to do? What should this work do? And there's this list created, you know, ideally, whatever we come up with, it's got to be national in scope, it's got to work all across the country. It's got to be systemic, so not just work at the individual or family level, but also at the community and society level of the social ecological model. Therefore, it has to have a population level impact. It's got to reach a large number of children. This whole idea of saving one child at a time, not working fast enough. It needed to really be far upstream. The impact needed to be felt long before child abuse or neglect actually occurred within a family. Ideally, it would promote optimal development for all children. This was a huge transformation of an idea for us, is that not only were we going to prevent child abuse and neglect, but we were going to promote child development. Truthfully, that was like an aha. That was a breakthrough moment. It was going to be strengths-based, so we were going to meet families where they were, we were going to meet communities where they were, we were going to meet systems where they were, and start from that point. It was going to be universal. And remember I said a couple minutes ago about this whole, it's about all of us, it's about you, it's about me? This approach was absolutely designed to be for all families. Not just those families, not families at risk, all families. And that it needed to engage new partners. We needed new messengers, we needed new people to infiltrate our communities with these ideas, right? Because the small group of people that were preaching to the choir wasn't enough. So, just historically, I think this is helpful to understand where the Center for the Study of Social Policy went from there is they embarked on two projects. One, they did a meta-lit research, right? What has anybody ever written ever on what prevents child abuse and neglect? And then the second thing they did was, again, kind of different and kind of exciting. They did some exception analysis. They actually identified 20 high-performing early childhood development centers around the country, and they sent researchers out there to basically observe, to just spend time watching what is going right. Why do these centers have low turnover among their staff? Why are their families have, you know, good longevity, great health outcomes, good transitions into kindergarten, right? What is working? And then at the end, they took those two bodies of research and they laid them over on top of each other. And what fell out were 5 protective and promotive factors. So because CSSP is a research think tank, obviously, often they start from things like logic models, right? And I think it's important to know both the stories and the research base. So this is the most current version of the logic model for the Strengthening Families framework. The outcomes, I'm going to start and go backwards. The results that they really were looking for, I kind of already addressed with you. Strengthening families, optimal development, prevention of child abuse and neglect, right? To get there, they identified these 5 protective factors. I always feel a need to kind of caveat here. These aren't the only protective factors that exist, right? If you go through research on substance abuse prevention or working youth development or many other fields, you will find other lists of protective factors. So that's not just to say these are only 5. It's just these are 5 that we know will prevent child abuse and neglect and existed in those centers that were doing things well, right? And so for us, they became the most important 5. That's not to say 20 years down the road we won't discover there's 2 more that we need to do too, right? So in looking at that, how do you build the protective factors? They really looked at it from 2 levels. There's some things that have to happen different at the system level, and there's some things that have to happen different at the program level. Both looking at how they engage families, how they engage parents, but recognizing that those activities might be different if you're sitting in a program versus if you're sitting in a system, okay? And then they really kind of got to what they're now calling core functions. For those of you familiar with the framework for a long time, they called these the levers of change. Anyone heard that term? But basically that we need to be building partnerships with parents, we need to be doing education, we need to be doing policy and practice change, and that we need to be doing some kind of ensuring accountability. So that would be things like building these kinds of the Strengthening Families Protective Factors framework into RFPs or into contracts, or utilizing some regulatory levers in addition to using education and parent partnerships. Does anyone have any questions about the logic model? Basically, to sum up, there are 4 big ideas that overarch the Strengthening Families Protective Factors framework. The first one is its approach. It's not a curriculum, it's not a program, it's not a model. It's a way to think about and look at the work that you do and potentially transform it in a way that can have more impact on promoting optimal child development and preventing child abuse and neglect. So it's not about doing more, it's maybe doing a little different or thinking a little different. Most importantly, maybe talking a little different. Because one of the things the Strengthening Families framework gave us is it gave us a common language among early childhood, among child abuse prevention, among family support, among child welfare, to start thinking about and talking about the work that we do with families using common language that we could all kind of wrap our heads around. The second thing, and I highlighted this before, but it's important, is that it was a focus not on risk factors, but on protective and promotive factors. We're going to recognize the good, and we're going to build more of the good, instead of focusing all the time on the bad. Okay? The third thing is that it was about truly deepening our relationships with parents and really partnering them with them in a way where they help drive the work, right? So this was really about working with families, not telling families what to do. And so that's a really important thread through here. And oh my gosh, I just totally blanked on the 4th big idea. So I'm going to use my notes, which I was going to try really hard not to do. But anyway, that's okay, we're all human. Oh, and this is also important, because this is the part that will continue to shape it over time, was that the Strengthening Families Protective Factors framework, it needed to help align practice with the newest knowledge in developmental science. So as our knowledge of child development and human development changes and grows, this approach, this framework, needs to move along with it. The framework now is almost 15 years old, and so last year they actually invested a lot of money into some new research, which is on the CSSP website, I'll show you at the end, to really do that, to really look at how has our knowledge of child development and developmental science changed since we initially created this framework, and has that changed how we need to talk about, live, look at each of those protective factors. And then they put that in a new report that they released at the end of last year, just to make sure that we're regularly doing that, because part of the idea was this is supposed to be bringing science to practice. Okay? So, with that in mind, I went ahead and redid the activity early, because everyone had kind of been sitting and getting a little tired, so that was the activity. You guys already did it. We did the activity as a way to introduce ourselves initially to some of the protective factors, and to really just kind of start talking about them and thinking about them. The 5 protective factors, it's funny, I'm going to do something today I haven't done before, which is I usually talk about the creation of these 5 protective factors the way that CSSP originally talked about them, which was to say, you know, there's 4 protective factors of things we do with parents, and there's 1 protective factor that we build with children, right? However, in the past year, and the opportunity of working with Carrie and starting to really grapple in my job with our 2-generation approach, I think within at least my unit at the Office of Early Childhood, we've really started to look at and challenge ourselves to think about how do we do each of these in a 2-generation approach, right? So honestly, how do we look at building social connections for a family, so for parents and for the children? How do we look at needing knowledge of parenting skills and child development? And that one may not seem quite so obvious, but if you're familiar, CSSP has now developed the Youth Thrive framework, which is basically a protective factors framework for adolescent children. And one of the things that they recognized in doing that was that youth need to understand youth development, what's going to happen to me, to my body, how am I growing, how am I changing. And I would actually argue that children need that as well. Long ago, and I think it's probably even out of practice, but 20 years ago there was this really great child abuse prevention program called Educating Children on Parenting out of Pennsylvania. They actually were implemented here in Colorado in every school until Columbine. Weird connection why, but anyway, why that made a difference. But they would actually partner a new parent and their baby with a 5th grade class, and that mom and baby would come into the class once a month the entire school year. And before they came in, the class would actually learn about human development, and they would make predictions about how that child would have changed, and they'd learn about how you nurture a child. And the child and mom would come in and they would watch them interact, and they would measure the child to see how much they'd grown and what kinds of skills they had. And when that program did evaluation, they actually found some short-term, medium-term, and long-term impacts. The short-term impacts is actually in that school they saw less bullying. Those kids, as they went to middle school, they saw less teen pregnancy. And then in the long term, they saw less child abuse and neglect. So I actually think we have, and I mean, it was a fairly small research study on, you know, a program that was implemented in a couple states, so it was never taken to scale. But I do think there is research out there that exists to show that children's knowledge of human development actually does help promote optimal child development. So I would argue that, again, we need to be looking at what parents and children know about how children grow, and what tools parents need to really help support that growth through the years. Parental resilience, I would argue, right now there's a huge conversation about how we build resilience in children, right? So we need to build it in mom and dad, we need to build it in the kids. Concrete supports in times of need, again, all of the above. Families have needs, parents have needs, kids have needs. As we're bringing resources to a family, we really should be looking at that full lens. Social emotional competence in children. You know, the funny thing is, you can teach children to do this really well, but if they don't have parents that model it or use these skills, they basically don't use them at home, right? So, and it's probably a false assumption to assume that every single adult has really healthy social emotional competence, right? So, so the 5 protective factors are all important, and they're all important for both the child and the parent. point out one thing about them. They don't have big talking points or anything, except for to say that even those of us who've been working in strengthening families work for a long time, and now there's 40 states that are implementing strengthening families in some way, have noticed and known for a long time that the academic language is great for the research and, you know, for the practitioners at conferences, but it's not the way parents talk about what they do in their everyday life and what they need. And so CSSP is actually, and I wish, I was so hoping it was going to be ready for today, they actually have written a new handout or brochure for parents on protective factors, and it uses parent language, right? So parent partners help write it, and I've used up on my slides their words, their titles that they like to kind of use for these protective factors, just to kind of start getting out there this idea of, we may not always use the formal words. Sometimes when we're talking with people, these are the things that come out, but we're still talking protective factors. When we're talking social connections, often families and parents talk more about how do they get and give support, as opposed to calling it, you know, social capital or social connections, right? I want to point out there's something really important about this protective factor, though I'm sure that most of you understand what it means to have social connections or have friends, have a support network. The important thing about this protective factor is that often I think when we're talking about it, we talk a lot about how to connect parents with each other and how to create opportunities for parents to make friends. And we forget the flip side of the coin, which is part of what families and parents get out of having social connections is also the ability to give. That we all fundamentally as humans feel worthy when we're able to help other people, not just take or get help, right? And so part of this social connection piece is really about the give and the take, and making sure that families have the opportunity to do both, no matter where they are in their life, no matter how many needs they have. Often when you sit down and talk with a family, or look at your own family, you see ways, if you're looking for them, that you are also supporting other people or giving back. And so calling that out and having conversations about that and building on top of that is really important. Does anyone, I did not put slides in for specific activities programs could do, because that's kind of a part 2 piece. But if anyone has any examples of ways that they build social connections, I would love to hear it.
So we have a monthly meeting. I work for something called the Objective Prosperity Project, and we are a relatively new and relatively small project. We've only got about 35 families enrolled, but we have monthly meetings, which all of the families attend, and sometimes there's a guest speaker that's talking about particular resources in the community that may be of need, but a lot of the times it is just a purely social activity for them to get to know one another, develop those relationships, and we do talk about, the terms that we use are sweat equity, sort of borrowing from Habitat for Humanity around that, and so we do talk about how do you give back in some way, shape, or form to each other by taking on a challenge yourself, by supporting somebody else and taking on a challenge they're working with. That's one way. The other thing I was saying earlier, as I was coming downstairs, I ran into a group from our project that was taking a college tour here at Red Rocks, and it was a variety of adults and their kiddos that are in our project that were on the tour. So those are 2 things I mentioned.
Awesome, that's great. Any other examples? Ways to build social connections?
We have a couple of different ones. One is a direct service example of doing prenatal care group models called Centering Pregnancy. And we have one clinic that's really promoting that. And right now about 1/3 of their prenatal patients receive a prenatal group care delivery model. And then they've extended it with the Centering Parenting program that goes through the child's first birthday. And so that's an opportunity to know. And then kind of more on the, population-based level, along with some of the screenings that we did of Raising Up America, we developed a handout called To Go Along with Buffering Toxic Stress that the Early Childhood Partnership put out that was around what you can do, the things you can do, and it had a parent component
have children or get to know a neighbor, because I also think that those kinds of connections are important. You know, it's important to bring parents together, but I also think bringing neighbors together is important, and just because your neighbor isn't a parent of kids of similar age doesn't mean that they can't contribute to, you know, your social capital, so to speak. So.
Thank you, that's awesome. How do you build social support in your own life? Or haven't?
Go to all these seminars and forums and meetings.
Yeah, right? For sure. If there's something to familiarity, right? If you put the same people in the same space over and over, it does, people start to make connections. They start to know each other's names, for sure.
I was just going to give an educational example. I mean, like the group of people that I went to grad school with, I mean, it was that learning cohort kind of model, and you can replicate that across lots of different post-secondary educational systems, and those are the people that I still keep in touch with, and that, you know, like, we're having kids together, and, you know, all of those things as you continue outside of the program, so.
I'm thinking in my book club that we haven't read a book in about 4 years.
I actually hear this a lot. We started as a book club, but then we really figured out we just like to get together and socialize. Yep. Yep.
So we had moved when our kids were younger to Iowa, never set foot in the state before, lived there for 10 years, and really our first social circles there were around our kids, and the soccer club was our main social outlet, and I still have many good friends that I met because our boys played soccer together.
Great, thank you for the examples. All right, so let's talk about knowledge of parenting and child development. We're going to talk about learning more so we can parent better. I think the key thing about this bucket, truthfully, is we've always done this in child abuse prevention. We've always known that, you know, kids don't come with a manual, and so we need to help parents learn more about what they can expect in terms of how their children might develop, and what kinds of things they can do to, you know, parent with pulling their hair out a little bit less, right? So we have all kinds of formalized ways to do this. We have many, many, many parenting class curriculums. We have parent support groups. We have home visiting programs that share child development information. So I always make a point here to kind of point out all those other things, all those other ways that families get this information, because they also get it from family and friends. They get it on the internet. There are books in the library about parenting, right? Like, we're inundated. There's stories on TV. It feels like these days we're pretty much inundated with messages all the time about how you're supposed to parent and what's good and what's bad. The thing about this protective factor is that honestly it's become totally overwhelming for parents, right? You can take any issue at all, so think sleep, right? And there's a huge continuum of opinions about what's best, right? So you either let your child cry it out, or you do attachment parenting, and everything in between. And if you're a new parent and you don't, you know, this is your first child, you don't have a lot of experience with children, and you go on the internet, or you start talking to people, you get all this conflicting advice. And that's really overwhelming. And so what often happens is parents kind of take in limit, like, okay, I'm only going to pay attention to what my grandma says, or, you know, like, because it just, they don't really know what's good or what's safe or what they should believe or what they should know. So one of the things I encourage programs to do around child development and parenting is, for sure, know how to refer to those kind of formalized programs. Another thing that you can do if you're not going to offer those programs within where you are, have a list, you know, of here are some websites we think are pretty good. You know, try to filter and vet some of that information and make it available to parents in a way that feels less overwhelming. And when I say filter websites, ideally what I would suggest is find websites that have more, that don't use inflammatory language, that aren't one extreme or another, right? That kind of use more moderate, factual types of formats, and that recognize that there's a range, right? So families, we want to encourage families to make the decisions that feel right for them, that will fit within their situation and their culture. And so no matter what topic that is on parenting, you're going to have a little bit of a, somewhere in this range is a good thing, right? So, you know, we try to suggest books and websites and things like that that kind of fit in that moderate range and that kind of acknowledge there is a range. And we try to kind of stay away from really promoting the things that really are very inflammatory or, you know, really try to get people stirred up into one extreme or another. Because then if that parent doesn't feel comfortable there, then they've got nothing, right? They don't really know where to go from there. So, any thoughts on how you guys have seen this done well or anything new you've heard recently? Yep.
I'm wondering about this one, and like if it'll transition over time to this concept that the Center for the Developing Child is promoting around skill building and parent competence. So, right, like rather than the approach being it's our job to assure parents have knowledge, it's our job to assure parents feel competent and feel confident in making their own parenting choices, whatever they are. And that's kind of a shift in one of the pieces of my work is with Fussy Baby Network Colorado, and there's an approach that really tries to build that parent confidence and competence, and isn't so much about what should I do about my foot, like, or what's the magic bullet, you know?
Yeah.
Should I swaddle, should I not swaddle? But it's really more about how are you going to come to that choice, and so that hopefully it then becomes applicable the next time that you have a crisis or an urgent matter in parenting and you're not sure what to do, that you have the skill to kind of sort through the information and make a decision.
Yes, I do absolutely think that that concept of confidence and competence is kind of ever present here, so I think you are kind of seeing that evolution. I do also think you're kind of seeing that evolution to human development, right? Birth to death, right? That we're kind of, there is no end point where we stop developing. I mean, the Strengthening Families Protective Factors Framework was really initially developed looking at children 0 to 8, right? But now kind of with that 2-generation lens and Youth Thrive looking at the adolescents and stuff, I think we are kind of going to that life course model. But I love that language around competence and confidence, because that's what really allows parents to, then if they need information, feel, know how to go get it or feel comfortable going and getting it. And not feeling like I have to know everything about everything already to do this well, right? So, any other thoughts on parenting skills or child development? Okay. So parental resilience, be strong, not stressed. And also, there's another national model that uses build your balance. But really looking at what is resilience and how do we build it. And just to clarify, this is not to say we should let people experience horrible things as long as they know how to be resilient, we're good, right? But even as we simultaneously work to prevent, things from causing trauma, we also do recognize that there are things that happen in all of our lives that couldn't be prevented or weren't prevented, and yet if we had a supportive relationship, if we had some resilience, we were able to learn from that and turn that into part of our strength, building kind of future. Like we were able to take that, work through it, and then we had the confidence to say, wow, I got through that, right? I didn't want to, but I did, I managed to make it, and look, I learned a couple things along the way. So I just always feel like I need to say, we're not saying resilience so that no matter what bad things happen, a child will be fine, but we are saying this has to be part of the mix, right? Parents and children need to be resilient. We live in a changing environment, things are constantly changing. How do we help humans develop in a way where they're most able to deal with that? So the definition of resilience that we've been using is resilience is a positive adaptive response in the face of significant adversity. So that adversity could be anything, right? It could be something, you know, ongoing and systemic like poverty. It could be a one-time experience of violence. Yep.
One thing I'd like to say about parental resilience is I just think it is very, what's the word I want? The other 4 protective factors all wrap around to support that resilience building.
Right,
You know,
yes.
So that parental education is going to help that parents bounce when they need to bounce with that kiddo. It's going to help the kiddo to develop their social and emotional competence because they have a parent who can bounce through the adversity. The concrete, you know, the supports are going to help build resilience. So all 4 of the others, I think, really support and wrap around resilience.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look through this list, you can see all of the other protective factors that are present, right? So the thing about building resilience is it's everything from things that are inherently in us, like our own faith or our own sense of hope, to informal supports, to potentially formalized concrete supports with issues like mental health or substance use, right? So it's, you know, taking a stress management class, it's doing mindfulness training or taking a run every day, connecting with the church, right? It's all of those things that we do to kind of keep us, sorry, for a minute there I had Dory from Finding Nemo, just keep on swimming, right? It's all those things we do to keep on swimming, right? So, so there's lots of things here that we can help families do in building in routines around safe self-care. There's lots of things we can do with providers around building in self-care for those who work with families, right? So it's really at every level. Again, it's about all of this. Like, it doesn't work if, you know, we build in the child but we don't build in the parent, or we build in the parent but we don't build it with the program that they're working with, or we build in the direct support position but we forget to teach the supervisors and managers, right? Like, these things are parallel processes. They're happening all at the same time. So building resilience within a community at the same time as we're building it within a family is really helpful. Just 2 kind of notes at the bottom, things we know. We know that children who have experienced as ACEs, so adults who have experienced ACEs as children, often need extra support in building that resilience. So just kind of a caveat there, the more kind of adverse experiences you have, probably the more additional support you need around building resilience and supporting resilience. And that's not to say they don't already have some resilience, right? This is a how do you reinforce, strengthen, increase. It's not to say, obviously most of the people who have experienced adverse childhood experiences are resilient. It's just how do we support that and build that and continue that. And then obviously, children with challenging behaviors often need additional supports around this regard as well. Concrete supports in times of need. Checking on the time here, I need to be wrapping up. I think this is the most obvious, right? Like, this obviously is all of the formalized supports, the programs that exist to help families, anything that they could potentially need. Response to crisis, daily needs, services for parents, services for children. I have an added, we should add services for the dyad, so the relationship between the child and the parent. The only thing I want to say here about concrete supports is that it's not just about referrals, right? Referrals sometimes are a first step, but there's 2 other pieces around these kinds of things. So not only do we need to have these services, not only do we need to refer to them, we also need to change community norms or reinforce community norms that says it's okay to ask for help, that we're all in this together, right? Because if we don't remove some of those cultural barriers to getting help or asking for help, then having these services available doesn't do a lot of good, right?
Can you show the slide right before this? What was
Sure.
the parent-friendly way to say this?
Get help
Help
when you
when
need
you
it.
need it. Okay.
And then the last one is around social emotional competence in children, help children manage feelings and relationships. That's kind of where they're headed with that. So this is everything from, how do I say this? So since most of you in the room are kind of from the early childhood space, you'll know that obviously over the past 5 years, there's been a huge movement from within the early childhood community to add social emotional, work and curriculums within early childhood development centers and preschools, right? What hasn't kept up pace is how we teach parents about this and teach them to do those things with their kids if they don't send their kids to early childhood development, right? So truthfully, I don't think all kids in Colorado are showing up to kindergarten or showing up to first grade, because kindergarten is not even entirely mandated, with the same skill level around social emotional competence, right? So you have some who really have, have had very intentional skill building, and then you have some that have had no intentional skill building, and anything that they've learned by just modeling the social interactions, the parents and the siblings that they're around. So I think the big idea here, and this is important because I don't think your average parent always hears it, is this doesn't just happen. Just like you have to teach numbers or teach ABCs, you have to teach kids how to recognize and label their feelings. You have to teach kids how to negotiate conflict. You have to teach kids how to problem solve. You need to teach kids how to make friends, how to give a compliment, right? All of these things. And the more intentional you are about it, the more you really kind of come at it from that skill building perspective, the better off these children are at being able to express their needs and wants. And the thing about having kids who are really good about expressing their needs and wants is that they're easier to parent, right? They act out less. And what's really beautiful about children who have social and emotional competence is they grow up to be adults that can do all of the protective factors as adults and for their children, right? So this is kind of an important linchpin, right, of like we need to do this right with kids and their parents at the same time, because that will help us build a generation of kids and parents who can do this well. So how, any examples of how you've seen this done, I'm going to say like outside of like Pyramid or Touch Points or Incredible Leaders, like so outside of some of the formalized early childhood programs that do this. It's hard to come up with any, right? Yep.
There's an organization in Denver called the Conflict Center, and they teach social emotional skill building to reduce violence. So it's a violence prevention program, and they have parent education programs, and then youth programs, and parent and child programs. And one of the things that they've done is to create a feelings magnet chart, and we've all seen like variations of it. And parents are taught to go home and use that tool to really talk about all of the different feelings that one can feel. And you can move the magnet around, like, how am I feeling today? And when I worked there, I had 2 young girls, and they were little at the time, and I'd take it home. And it was a way for them to really expand even the way we talked about emotions at home, and then to like 30 different types of emotions. And then they talk about why they're feeling that way, and then I could show how I'm feeling, and they can understand how I'm feeling as well as express how they're feeling. And that simple tool opened dialogue in ways that no parenting book ever did.
You know, it's funny because, I've been teaching this a long time. I feel like I know a fair amount about the topic. But last year I took a seminar through the University of North Carolina on the newest research in positive psychology and positivity. And one of the things, and this was so basic, and it was like, the first week in the class or whatever, they asked you to name like how many positive emotions can you come up with? So it's quick, we can do it here. How many positive emotions? You guys just go ahead and throw them out there.
Happy.
Good.
Excited.
Happy, excited, what?
Joyous.
Joyous.
Surprised.
Surprised. Okay.
Elated.
Elated, what?
Ecstatic.
Ecstatic.
Thrilled.
Right?
Grateful.
Grateful, okay. So I've heard some variation on happy, like lots of good words to describe happy. Grateful's a little different, and I heard surprised, right? It's hard, right? There's like dozens of positive emotions, right? But apparently there's like 12 really big, important ones. But we don't teach our kids positive emotions. So, you know, we get really good at like helping them refine and list out all the negative emotions, right? But we forget to teach the other side, right? And so things like, some of the ones that really surprised me were things like interest, like being passionate about something, learning, right? Like that feels good, right? But we never label it as a feeling and reinforce it for kids, right? So there's all kinds of things, I think, in this realm that we're still realizing that we, you know, still aren't kind of intentionally skill building around, right? And if you're lucky enough to live in a family that has a really positive person and kind of models some of that naturally, you get it. And if you don't, you might not. Right? So, all right. I think we're almost there. So how do you get started with the Strengthening Families work? The thing we talk a lot about with Strengthening Families is that it's really about finding one small thing and doing that one small thing, and then finding the next small thing, right? It's not about having big buckets of money. It's not about starting new programs. Remember, I started by saying it's really about thinking different, doing things a little different, responding to things a little different, looking at them through a different lens. So we're really looking at small incremental changes among a lot of people, right? Like a population of people doing small things incrementally to make big change. So some of the suggestions we make are things like talk to staff, talk to teachers, talk to parents, talk to community partners, just start having conversations like we did today around asking for and needing help, around what it means to be a good parent, around positive emotions, right? Start having those conversations and thinking about how that fits in to the work that we do and the life that we live. You know, if you want to take the next step, there are self-assessments. If you want to go from there, there are the protective factor survey. There's ways to measure change among protective factors, right? But really what we're looking for is to light a spark to get people to commit to one small thing. Go meet your neighbor. There's a ton of resources now around this work. I want to point out two in particular. One, strengtheningfamilies.net is the CSSP website. That's where you'll find the online self-assessment tools. They've now developed different assessment tools for different types of programs. They're in English and Spanish. The protective factor survey link is there. There's also a database tool you can use to collect that kind of data. There's guidebooks. There are action sheets. They have really nice new two-page, or one-page front and back fact sheets on every single protective factor. And the front does a really good job of defining it in depth and talking about it. And the back is literally a list of here are all the things you can do right now to start working on building that protective factor. And then I'm going to point out one, there are classroom trainings available in our state through a lot of the early childhood councils through a training called the Strengthening Families Toolbox Training. But it's a big commitment, 17 hours, you know, you have to wait for someone to offer it and get it. So we always kind of promote the free online training. There is a 7-module free online training here at ctfalliance.org that goes through all the protective factors. There's a little bit of customization. It will ask you from the beginning, do you work in family support, or are you a parent? Do you work in child welfare? And then it tries to kind of customize a little bit of what you see based on what you select. A lot of organizations, I think the state has done this in the past, and also local early childhood councils in the past have granted certificates for completing the training, so you can use it for contact hours. So I always point that out. The other thing that's not on here, but I want to mention, is Colorado is one of those 40 states working on this framework. And we do have a Strengthening Families Network that has quarterly meetings. We had a conference in 2014. We're looking to do a next conference fall of 2016. So if you're not on that yet, if you want to, Brenda and I co-chair that. If you want to reach out to either of us, we'll make sure you get on that list. And just because of where we are today, to mention that Strengthening Families Network does act as an action team for the Early Childhood Colorado Partnership. to really make sure that we stay engaged with the work that's happening. And so if you haven't connected, that's another way you could get involved. And there's my contact information. And I know I'm a little bit late, so how much of a break?
So we need 5-minute break.
So now we have Brenda McChesney, who today is her first day with the Humira Foundation, and she's the Awakening director there. And she's also the co-lead of the Strengthening Families Coalition and was working with the Family Resource Center Association. And she is going to talk about the standards of quality for family strengthening and support.
Thank you, Heather. All right, so we're going to start this session also with an activity standing. So I invite you all to stand up and come here in one big circle. Won't be very long. I shouldn't. So one circle. And it can be an oblong, egg-shaped. I'll stand up here. So this is called front to front, back to back. And you're going to count off 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. As soon as it's going, bring it all the way in. Full circle. So once we have everyone in joined in the circle, we'll go around and you'll just say 1 and then 2. All right, so we'll start here. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, and 2, 2. So I'd like to have 1s stand in the middle of the circle facing back to the outer ring, and 2s stand in front of a 1. So you should be right in front of another person. Is everybody hear that? We can do 2 people. Joyce, you can join the outside. Everybody has a person, right? Right. Okay, everybody has a person. So now you're going to stand back to back. Would you like to join us? Sure. We have one more right here. It'll be a perfect pair. All right. So now, please, the people in the inner circle turn around, and the people in the outer circle turn around. You're going to go back to back. So this is a way you can work with youth or adults. These are activities to stimulate dialogue. And when you're back to back, no talking. And when you're front to front, you get to answer the question. All right? So the very first question is, for you to go front to front with your partner, is how do you personally currently provide family support and strengthening in your program or agency within your current role? So how do you support family support and strengthening you as an individual? Front to front. 1 minute. All right, 1 or 2 things. What came up? How does the person you were talking with support family strengthening support?
My partner is building Project Launch, which has home visitation and other quite admirable characteristics.
Wonderful. Thank you. One other example?
Chris works for Safe Air Care out in Arapahoe County, and also home visitation, and really linking to these supports.
Very specific support for families. Fantastic. All right. So outer circle, stay put. Inner circle, step 1 to your left.
Left.
1 to your left. Everyone's like, all right. And if you just joined us, you can join a group. You can go back to back right there with Heather.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. And yep, you can just stay right there and turn around. The next question is this. So what is your experience with standards of quality in terms of your program and your agency? So measuring quality. What's your experience with quality standards? Front to front. There was a lot of dialogue this time. So now when I ask for examples, I expect smiley faces. What are some of the examples of experience with quality standards or standards of quality within your practice?
Cooking Matters has some program level quality standards that all of the staff and volunteers are trained on in the implementation of their program.
Fantastic. Other examples? We'll just keep
Working to fidelity, so having a model that you are working towards, and then you're striving for fidelity.
So connecting quality implementation with fidelity measures, yeah.
And also evaluation.
Thank you. All right, inner circle, one more time to the left. Last question. So the next question really focuses around staff performance and the parent surveys. So how right now are your programs or agencies assessing staff's, their own self-reflection on quality practice and collecting information around the parents' understanding and experience of the quality work of your program or agency? Okay, French part. Stand back to back, but what are some examples of staff self-assessment tools that are used to measure quality that are being implemented currently?
Surveys.
What?
Surveys.
Surveys. So are there specific programs that have them tied to them?
Well, you
No pointing.
Is there one example you could share?
Not specifically.
Well, the parent surveys that are part of the quality improvement evaluation done for quality ratings.
Okay. Fantastic.
What she said.
Yes.
We were working with some partners to convene informal care providers and do some qualitative research, informal focus groups.
Very innovative. Targeting specific populations that are on
Around the state.
Yes. Yeah. Wonderful. Another example?
Within Safe Care Colorado, there are parent surveys after each of the modules that the parents do, and they're in the tablet, and they are able to be uploaded by Kim, so they're anonymous, and
Wonderful.
you can get them right there on the spot.
And how about staff self-reflection surveys around their own quality practice?
Well, one other example I had is in that same program, I use reflective supervision with staff. So I don't know, we don't track that. But the idea is that, yes, it would help in their decisions, you know, when they work with their families.
So you found a way to integrate that into your dialogue?
Our supervision, yeah.
Other?
There are actually, I'm not a provider, but there are actually programs with really severe cases where the staff has to decompress, or, you know, they come together. It's part of the whole program, like with DBT therapies and stuff. It's built in that the staff comes together and kind of that decompresses.
That secondary trauma on the wall. And
I was stunned.
Excellent. I appreciate how much hearty dialogue, given that we're about an hour away from leaving, and in the afternoon, you can go ahead and have a seat, and this teases us up to our conversation about quality standards. Teams to come together. Now, it could be a rollout approach because sometimes offices can't shut down, right? But the idea is that you have everyone from the executive director to the managers, coordinators, direct service staff, parent leaders, and families, ideally working as a system together. So we encourage people to come together in teams to train, and then also bring it back within their organization to have larger level dialogue. Kendra was talking about, one of the kind of flaws sometimes in our implementation systems is that maybe managers or upper level management or executives hand off this great program to their staff and aren't necessarily versed in strengths-based language or ways to support that practice or ways to encourage it or incorporating protective factors even into their own ways that they're leaders within their organization. So we really feel it's a critical approach to have the multiple levels involved. So because similar to the Strengthening Families Protective Factors, the quality standards were created to be accessible to all. So they're free to download on this website, the California Family Support Network website, as well as you can go to the Family Resource Center Association website, and their link will take you specifically to the quality standards in California. And there you can access all 3 assessment tools downloadable for free, similar to the Protective Factors framework. So a little bit about the developmental process of the quality standards. It took 18 months of really doing a full national level research in terms of a scan of standards across the nation, and they ultimately says 17 sets of standards. And ironically, they decided to go with the San Francisco Family Support Network quality standards because they were the ones that they had developed theirs based upon the principles of family support that we'll talk about in a minute and the Strengthening Families Protective Factors, but then they were revised and built to be more robust to be reflective of what they've become today.
but after scanning all 17 across the nation, it was the one that had best fundamentally incorporated the 2 foundational frameworks in our field. It was vetted with over 1,000 diverse organizations in California and reviewed by the Center for the Study of Social Policy. In 2012, it was approved by the California membership, and then in 2013, our national network also sought to adopt it, and Colorado's Family Resource Center Association adopted it in 2013 too. So all of a sudden in 2013, there was this massive expansion of it and ability to say, we want to align to be able to have this common language and common measurement and tool across the nation. So as I mentioned, the quality standards have 2 foundational frameworks that they're built upon. The first one is the Principles of Family Support Practice, developed by the Family Support America. And then the second one is the research-based, evidence-informed, strengthening families' protective factors, developed by the Center for the Study of Social Policy that Kendra reviewed. So we'll take a minute to go through the very first framework, which is the Principles of Family Support Practice. Raise your hand if you've heard of the Principles of Family Support before. Oh, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so for many of you, these will be a bit new. And I will ask you, after we go through the 9 briefly, to think about which one resonates with you most. When you hear it, when you think about what it means, what speaks to you most, and then we'll have a little dialogue at the table. So family support, number 1 of the Principles of Family Support is that, this is a little bit about the framework first. That is based on the premise that the primary responsibility for the development and well-being of children lies within the family, so very much similar to strengthening families' protective factors. And the family support perspective is that all segments of society must support families as they raise their children. So it's all of our responsibility to support families within our communities. Okay, so here's the principles. Principle number 1, staff and families work together in relationships based on equality and respect. We know that that was not initially how social service systems were developed, that it was a power-over approach. I have knowledge, authority, power. You lack it, you made wrong decisions, or you need my help, and I'm going to tell you what you need to do to be able to get to a certain outcome. Well, family support and this particular principle says, you know what? Families are, parents are the ones who know their children and their families best, and they come in with a whole depth of knowledge that we don't yet know through our dialogue, and we also have knowledge and skills, and we can work together to help families achieve their goals and to thrive. Number 2, staff enhances families' capacities to support the growth and development of all family members, adults, youth, and children. So really this speaks to that 2-gen approach. That it really takes the holistic picture when we're working with families in our communities. Principle number 3, families are resources to their own members, to other families, to programs, and to communities. So that families have resources to offer themselves and the people around them. It's this piece of the interconnection between families and community systems that's so important, that role that we play of connecting families to the community that they live in and community members to each other. Now they're all listed right here, so just think about which one stands out to you, but you can reflect on the chart. Okay, number 4, program affirms and strengthens families' cultural, racial, and linguistic identities and enhances their ability to function in a multicultural society. So this really is, we have a whole section, and I'll talk about it a little bit, around embracing diversity, and what does that look like, and how do we work with communities within their cultural context. Principle 5, programs are embedded in their communities and contribute to the community building process. So this deepens that community building piece just a little bit more. So that programs are reflective of the communities, they're embedded in the communities, they're accessible to families within the communities, and that programs have an inherent responsibility to connect those families that they serve to activities and other agencies within the community. Principle 6. Programs advocate with families for services and systems that are fair, responsive, and accountable to the families they serve. So this really is about cultivating that parent voice, that parent leadership, and helping families understand how to both navigate the systems, but also have the expectations that systems are fair and just to meet the needs that they have. Number 7, practitioners work with families to mobilize formal and informal resources to support family development. So information, resource, and referral, concrete support times need. Principle number 8, Programs are flexible and continually responsive to emerging family and community issues. So a community that may be primarily Latino today could be primarily Asian tomorrow. And what does that mean in terms of your program and your agency and the linguistic skill sets of the staff that you have, as well as the cultural responsiveness of the staff, as well as the community issues that might arise. And principle number 9. Principles of family support are modeled in all program activities, including planning, administration, and governance. So this is saying really all of our organizational infrastructure and everything, but kind of like the framework through which we live by and breathe organizationally should be reflective of all 8 principles of. Now you're not supposed to have a favorite, but this is my favorite because it holds us all accountable to really making sure that we are the change that our families need and that we want to see within our communities. So I'd like you to take a second, look over the 9, and just talk for a moment of which one really stands out to you and why. Take 3 minutes or so. At your table, so. We haven't yet heard from the only man in the room.
I was listening to that. They were talking about Principle 8 a little bit, but for me, I think Principle 1 stood out the most because coming from a center-based situation, I think teachers and coaches, and they struggle with looking at families on that equal level. If you can't start there, that's trouble.
It's a fundamental beginning place to be able to really effectively do all of this.
Exactly.
Excellent example. How about from the middle table, right?
I do like a lot of them, but number 8, I don't think there was anything you didn't like. For me personally, number 8 stood out because our project is designed to be longitudinal and work from the time families are in Head Start all the way through high school graduation. So over the course of that, 13 to 15 years, you're going to need to be flexible and responsive to emerging issues. So.
Fantastic. How the 5 sections of the quality standards are laid out. And it's how they're trained to and how each of the measurement tools breaks down each of the 5 sections of the standards. So the very first is family-centeredness. Who can read what's underneath that for me? In black. Under family-centeredness, column 1.
Valuing and recognizing families as integral to the program.
Yes. So that your programs and your agencies are family-centered, that families are integral to the programs that you serve, and that they should be very responsive to families and what their family needs are. The second one is family strengthening. Another volunteer.
Supporting families to be strong, healthy, and safe, thereby promoting their optimal development.
Yes.
Good eyes.
Yes, very good eyes. So this one's pretty self-explanatory, so that we really are looking to help support families so that they are safe, they are stable, they are thriving, and that we're helping to promote their optimal development. Embracing diversity.
Acknowledging and respecting families' diversity, supporting their participation in a diverse society, and engaging in ongoing learning about and adaptation to diversity.
Yes. So this goes, if we start from the bottom up, it's about staff and organizations' responsiveness to the cultural needs of the diversity within the families they serve. It's about helping those families navigate the differences of diversity both within the community, their relationship to the external community, and accessing programs that are specific to their needs. And then really looking at the community level perspective of, are we being responsive to the cultures and the families within our communities? Community building, another volunteer.
Contributing to building a strong and healthy community by facilitating families' social connections, developing their leadership skills, and collaborating with other programs.
Yes. So this particular section covers what it might look like in terms of types of community events that you might hold, or not, well, they could be considered community events, but really events at your center that are outside just the specific programs to look at integrated families. So right, if all of us were in our little programs and we just did that, but what would it look like coming together for a potluck? And how could that potluck be themed or around particular events within the communities and connecting families that way? Also looking at parent leadership, parent engagement, cultivating that parent voice, and then collaborating with other programs and agencies to help support both cross-systems collaboration locally, possibly statewide, as well as families to those community agencies. And last but not least, everyone's favorite, evaluation.
I like it, so I'll read it. Looking at areas of program strength as well as areas for further development in order to guide continuous quality improvement and achieve positive results for families.
Yes, thank you so much. So not only is evaluation both covered in the evaluation tools that are provided through this, but really outside of that, how does your organization use data in a learning process that both collecting the data, assessing the data, learning from the data, creating change within your program structure from the data, and ideally using that data to share with a parent informing group, maybe a parent leadership group, to say, here's the results from this last program, and here's what parents said they're interested in for future learning opportunities. What do you think we should do? And then using that as a continuous process to learn from and refine our practice around. So the quality standards have 17 standards total across those 5 sections, and each standard has 1 to 2 sets of indicators, both minimum quality and high quality. So minimum quality indicators demonstrate basic application of the standard. So minimum is not considered low quality, right? So I'll show you in just a second, there's a spectrum, a continuation implementation spectrum, recognizing that not all programs and agencies are going to even meet minimum quality because maybe they haven't thought about this component yet. Maybe you're new, maybe your capacity is really limited, you've had to put all your resources in particular buckets, but you identify goals for your agency, and you use those goals to leverage community partnerships, to leverage additional funding, recognizing that being responsive to cultural needs in your community should be a high priority for your organization, and then you can use these quality standards to really look at where are you at, and how can you be responsive to it. So programs build on minimum quality indicators to achieve high quality indicators, which represent ongoing and deeper commitment to the application of the standard. So often, achieving high quality work requires additional capacity, additional efforts. It may be, and I was in Chicago training recently, and it was actually the home of Family Support America. So the home of these family principals. The woman who was the primary architect of these, who's now 88 years old, was scheduled to do the quality standards training. She was incredibly excited and ended up falling ill that morning. So we got to meet her later on. But the point is that when we were going through this detailed 8-hour training, kind of talking about high quality practice, for many of the sets of standard indicator pairs, they're like, well, this just seems like this should be minimum. I don't understand why it's high quality. And we had to take a pause and we were like, you are the mothership of family support in the United States. Like you have been the primary architect of these principles and practices that people are trying to infuse within their organizations. So of course, to you, what seems basic it seems basic, but it's high quality work. And you've done a tremendous amount over the last 30 years to build your systems to have high quality programs and high quality practices. So it's really interesting, right? Our mental models around what should be minimum, what should be high, but what we need and what this does is align the idea of quality across the US and across our systems and within our communities so we can all speak from the same framework. And that funders can understand what it looks like to have high quality work. And our staff can understand what it looks like to try to achieve minimum quality work when implementing programs for families. So each indicator is followed by 2 or 4 examples from the field or nationally that are illustrations. And they're not meant to be an exhaustive list by any means, nor are the examples that you'll see when you download the tools meant to be items that you should be doing to meet minimum quality. It's just a way to start to get your brain working in terms of brainstorming around what does this mean for your program and your agency. And as programs apply the standards, they're encouraged to identify their own examples that demonstrate the indicators in ways that are relevant to their communities. So you can start to build your own example pool. You'll see here, so I mentioned, Eric talked a little bit about minimum quality is that solid foundation of family strengthening and support, and they're met with a reasonable scope of resources. High quality indicators are built upon minimum. Programs are encouraged to strive to meet them in order to serve families most effectively, and that some may require additional capacity. But here at the bottom, you'll see the continuum. So when your program or your agency does the program self-assessment, it has the option to mark minimum quality not yet addressed, and that's fine. Then the next would be approaching minimum quality, meets minimum quality, meets minimum and approaching high quality, and meets minimum and meets high quality work. For the family resource centers that are part of the association, what we've done is every organization does this once a year, and we enter it into our database, and then they identify 5 areas that they want to improve quality practice over the next year. And so then we look at customizing coaching, training, or support, or peer networking, and encouraging our centers to look at improving quality practice. We don't dictate how high they have to move within that, or even which sections within that. They're constantly working to improve quality practice. And implementing the standards is a developmental process, and it's common that programs may see aspects of their work at different points along the quality continuum. So this really is not sort of an end destination, that there's really never an end, right? So even in Chicago, where they're the founders of family support, we say, great, you're high quality, now what? What else do you want to do to even continue to move to improve and be responsive to the families within your agency and within your community? There are, of the 5 sections, 4 of the sections have these 3 elements that make a program move from minimum quality to high quality. So for family-centeredness, family strengthening, embracing diversity, and community building, there's 3 different ways that programs move from minimum to high. The first is formal structure. So one example might be policies and procedures, right? That you have written in your foundational organizational policies, a commitment to the elements that are outlined in the book, maybe a commitment to staff training around cultural responsiveness issues or being family-centered. Also staff training, so that if you have instituted formalized staff training to bring your staff up to speed on particular issues, that would move you from minimum to high quality. And then looking also at family partnership. So really having that parent voice is critical and key in terms of both strengthening families, in terms of the principles of family support, and looking at high quality programs have that incorporation of that parent partnership. So that may be that parents are included in initial surveys to talk about what types of programs are needed within their community, or other examples that I don't have time to talk about because we're running out. So again, minimum quality is foundational, and higher quality is considered a much deeper integration of the quality standards. This is one example for you to see how they're laid out within the training workbook, as well as within the assessment tools. So this is family-centeredness, and this is the very first standard, standard family-centeredness point 1. And so the standard is, program encourages families to participate in program development and implementation. So if your agency or program were to solicit input from families to shape and plan the program and services, maybe that's a survey, then you would meet minimum quality in this particular indicator pair. Now, if you incorporated a formal structure and a family partnership, then you would be high quality. And what I really like about the way that the quality standards are laid out, not only is it extremely concrete in every example what the difference is, what the missing element is to go from minimum to high, but you'll see over here where it's italicized and emboldened. So this tells you really specifically for the example what it means to say, okay, so formal partnership, what exactly does that mean and how does it get you to high quality? Well, if minimum is your program solicits input from families to shape and plan the programs and services, high quality would mean that the program design supports partnering with families to have an active role in the development and the implementation of programs. So that it's really formalized in your agency, and that you're not like, hey, you know what, it's been like 8 months. Maybe we should send out a survey and a poll. Like, why don't we do that? We'll get it from like 10 parent voices, and then maybe we'll read it, maybe we won't. Maybe it'll actually impact programs, versus actually having a structured approach, which is every time we close out a program, we're doing a parent survey, we're collecting it, we're entering it, we're looking at it, we're sharing it back, or whatever else your process might be. So there's one small example of a difference between minimum and high quality. So evaluation is the exception to the rule in terms of what takes you from minimum to high quality. So you'll see here that the differences are data analysis, sharing of evaluation results, program modification based upon those evaluation results, training for evaluation, integration. So we're really looking at any of those 4 elements you'll see reflected on when we look at evaluation from going from minimum to high quality. So it's one thing, again, to like take a survey and you're like, oh, here's 10 of them, we're going to stuff them in a drawer, versus actually being really meaningful about the analysis of it and sharing of it, and then modifying your program based upon the results. So I already mentioned these are the 3 implementation tools that can be downloaded for free. The first one is the program self-assessment tool, and it's designed to be used as a critical thinking exercise by program teams. So again, this is not an effective tool to have a single person go out and come back. I mean, certainly they could do it and evaluate their program, but then it's sort of done in isolation and not through the systems approach, and because so many of the elements are looking from either organizational lens or program lens. You'll see this program self-assessment tool. In Colorado, we use program as the Family Resource Center. So our centers complete this tool thinking about their entire organization. And they can really hone in on specific parts, for example, to look at minimum high quality, but they're also encouraged, if they like, to say, oh, well, we really want to evaluate parents as teachers. So we're going to go ahead and specifically also use it within that context. So there's a staff self-reflection checklist that feeds right back into the program self-assessment, and this is used as a daily reminder of implementing the standards. We have people at our centers who laminate it and put it on their cubicle wall as a reminder of all really positive things that we want to be doing to help families, and it's a way to sort of have that positive affirmation in front of them. And then the standards participant survey is 14 questions for program participants to indicate how well the program is meeting their the parents or participants' needs, and they are available in English, Spanish, and Chinese. And I think they're going to be translated into other languages in the coming year. So California and the National Network felt it was really fundamental and critical to have a training component to go along with this. Because to just sort of be able to look at all the assessment tools only gets you sort of this deep in terms of understanding the meaning behind them and how to create change associated with it. And so training is really a fundamental strategy for implementing the standards effectively. Training is offered in a full-day certification. It's 8 hours that's done, and the training certification is good for 2 years. And then there's a recert that comes after the 2 years, and it's, I think, right now 4.5 hours or 6. They're refining it right now because it's the very first group where we're 2 years out and they are almost finalized with the research. And then there's a training of trainers, and that's done in California, and it's a 4-day training where trainers who are experts in the field of family strengthening support or the principles of family support practice are vetted to become national trainers. Right now I think we have around 26. And all trainers right now in trainings come out of the Family Resource Center Association, because the National Network felt like it was important to have leaders in our field who are grounded in family support and strengthening practices really be the hubs in each state as it rolls out. So every state, that one Family Resource Center network, which is the state network, is identified as a lead, and they're the ones that manage all the trainings, tracking, certificates, etc. So funds that are generated both support the national network as well as the local networks. So it really is looked at as an opportunity for network sustainability in terms of keeping those expertise and the leadership in the field strong and thriving. Application of the standards. So there are 6 different ways that the standards can be applied. So raise your hand if you consider yourself to be a family support and strengthening program. So if you are working within a program or an agency. Right, so this is really allows you to do the self-assessment process, to demonstrate quality, and implementing best practice. If you're a direct service staff, raise your hand. So for direct service staff, it helps them reflect on and enhance their work with families. It's also meant to support networks of family strengthening and support providers. Who is here a part of a network? Kendra, I think you get to raise your hand on this one. Yes. Right? So it helps with quality assurance, with training and technical assistance, capacity building, and to adopt as criteria for membership. It also can be applied with policymakers. Anyone here a policymaker? No? So they can endorse for application in areas of influence. Funders, anybody here a funder? The first day I get to raise my hand. So we get to integrate into requests for proposals, monitoring, and also quality assurance. And in California, their funding community, it was their idea to support these to such a degree that they write it into all their RFPs for family support and strengthening practices, and the funders like the California network doesn't do any oversight in terms of the program self-assessment. The funders on their annual site visit go in and review the program self-assessment tool to be as one of the areas of alignment in terms of implementation of quality programs for what they're funding. And they check the database on an annual basis to make sure that a certain percentage of all the staff at the agencies have their certification up to date because they're that invested into it. So it's really taken off. And then, of course, with families. So partnering with programs to apply the standards and to provide feedback on how well the programs are being applied. These are really quick examples of implementation tools that they developed. So this one's a program implementation tool. So if you're a program or an agency and you're like, well, we may be interested in learning more about this, this literally maps out the continuum and sort of the steps associated with it. And you'll see here that a certification training is never or more than $100. And when grants are offset the cost, they can be reduced, but that generally the top end is $100 a person for the full-day certification training. There's also a network implementation continuum that they provided, and then an example of network implementation. So with the Colorado Family Resource Centers, they've been written into our membership agreements. All 3 assessment tools are utilized, and that they've attended quality standards trainings. We have 141 staff so far trained, with more to be trained into the future, and that we're developing additional technical assistance support for them. And I think, so the standards have really started to explode. Not only they were adopted in 2013 nationally, when FRCA conducted its literature review to develop the Family Resource Center model that's on its way to being research-based, evidence-informed, the Omni Research Institute identified 7 key components of family resource centers, which overlaid perfectly with all the quality standards that were represented. And when we talked about, okay, now next is to create standards to go with this model for fidelity implementation, they're like, you have it all here. Everything you need is within these quality standards, and they're great. So that was really exciting to hear. The Center for the Study of Social Policy included it on its tools to support, its list of tools to support strengthening families implementation. So it has its stamp of approval. They've been incorporated into California's Race to the Top, Children's Bureau Child Abuse and Neglect presentation at their national conference in New Orleans in 2014. We also presented at the Friends National Center for Community-Based Child Abuse in 2014. And in March, Andrew, who's the co-chair of California, and myself got to take it internationally for the first time and participated in the Canadian Association of Family Resource Center programs. It was their 40th year anniversary of having family support in Canada, and it was the first time that it was taken outside of the US. So this is an interesting little map. So this right now are the counties who have hosted family research or the quality standards trainings in California. This is an image of all people where they came from in the county to travel to have the quality standards training. So you'll see only 17 counties have offered it, but over 46 counties have been represented in traveling to the quality standards, and we're finding this is happening nationally, and there's not enough trainers yet to really meet the demand and the expansion. So people are traveling across state boundaries, across county boundaries, to be able to have the quality standards. And you'll see here, this is a map of all the states as of last month, or May 2015, that have adopted and implemented the quality standards with a total of 1781 certificates so far. And so that's sort of the official formal overview that we provide nationally in terms of a little bit of the background around quality standards. I just wanted to offer a second for questions or feedback on them.
Can you, in the previous slide in Colorado, can you talk a little bit about Colorado specifically and where you implemented?
Yes. So across our 24 family resource centers, we've had 141 individuals trained over 5 trainings. And what that means is we have between 2 and 6 staff at each of our family resource centers who have this. Basically, we had seed money to do the first infusion, and the plan is to do additional infusions. 2, in fact, in the coming 2 months. And then for the first time in Colorado, we will be launching outside the Family Resource Centers with the Office of Early Childhood. So next week, we'll be doing 2 trainings, training 70 more people across promoting safe and stable families programs and community response. Yeah, Colorado Community Response. So it's now, we had to get our own capacity sort of underway before we let it out. And right now we have 2 trainers. We're about to have hopefully 3 to 4 total out by January. And so we have agencies contacting us. We'll be doing 2 trainings in Pueblo coming up, and then looking at doing recertification training for the first round of those from our FRCs who receive their training in November. So we'll be up and running with the research training also this year.
So how often are you scheduling the trainings then, or is it almost like staff goes to you? Do you ever come out and do something for a small group, or how does that all work?
Great question. Right now, we do not have any open enrollment trainings. So it's on the horizon, and we've just been working on customizing trainings for organizations.
Okay.
So at this point, if you are an agency or a community who wants to bring this to your community, contact, you'll see Rachel Shuck, who is the primary contact person at FRCA right now. And what we can do is talk about how many people do you have interested. And the max is 36 or 37. Can't remember what the new limit is. It may have gone up to 37. Is it 37 max? 36. It's 36 is the maximum number, and we have a minimum of 20 because of all the time and intensity involved in it. We also, the California Network developed a mini grant template for agencies who may not have the funds to train, but want to secure funds from a funder, and it's a really like plug and play nice way to ask. And FRCA has that template to use, as well as we know that other agencies are interested, so we can say, okay, Joyce, will we use your organization, and 2 of the others can come together, each kind of paying their own way, and then being able to offer within the community. Yes?
You know, maybe California's doing it. I was just curious about the workforce development. Like, are they talking about this at universities and colleges, and kind of instead of it being added on, right, to people already, trying to correct? Is there a way to kind of
on the front end? I see that particularly social work degrees are addressing many of these fundamental roots. In Chicago, they have, like, based on Family Support America's, everything that they developed, there you can get a master's in family support. I don't know if that's the exact word, but it's pretty much like that. And it's basically, social work meets the depth of family support practice, and so you come out sort of being an expert within all of this content. So I think that we're seeing it emerge in slightly different ways, but it's always an excellent topic to sort of bring and try to infuse in trainings and professional development opportunities. Any other questions? All right, then I'll show the last slide, which is Rachel's contact information. And thank you for your time today, and I'll turn it back over to Heather or
For part 1 and for planning for part 2, Brenda and Carrie and I had long conversations about this, wanting to be able to create a visual or a crosswalk for you guys and for the state that would kind of really show how all 3 of these things relate. And we realized as we got in those conversations that, and we probed across the nation, nobody else has done this yet, that we didn't, it was difficult. We didn't have any great ideas of really how this all works together and how to represent that. And so we were hoping to solicit your feedback to do so. So we actually have 2 questions that we'd love you guys to answer. We recognize there's not a lot of time left, so truthfully, if you are willing to just jot down a couple of whatever comes immediately to mind, you don't have to have big tabletop discussions or anything. If you would write some thoughts on here, just leave them. We will commit to looking at them and kind of working through that between now and part 2 in the fall to see if we can bring back some kind of draft, for lack of a better word, infographic for you guys to kind of respond to in terms of, does this, now that you've kind of heard about all the frameworks, does this do a good job of representing for you how you think they fit together? I'm going to let Carrie make an announcement really quick.
Yeah, so I mean, just kind of teasing the save the date. So save the date, September 16th, we'll do part 2, and that really will be more focused on how various partners, including some specific economic security, employment, partners as well that we'll bring to the table for that one. How we can work together to develop strategies for embedding these concepts and ideas, all three of these frameworks, into practice. So we'll bring examples and have lots of ideas about how to do that. So this, again, as I said earlier, was more of the knowledge building, and the next time will be more of the practice and applicability piece. So please join us again on September 16th, and tell all your friends as well to join us. And I believe the recordings will be on the Padlet page as well, so that people who missed today can catch up on the knowledge piece, watch those presentations, and then be able to participate fully next